Good morning, all. Happy Friday. I hope you're feeling accomplished at the end of your week and have started to prepare to the exam on Monday. Uh, are there any questions before I start the lecture? All right, please make sure to check the announcements on web courses for the exam logistics to go over the exam logistics. Most of them are going to be the same as for the exam one. There will be one additional rule, which will basically, I'm asking you not to leave the exam tab while you're taking the exam. Otherwise, it will be my way to check if you're looking up for answers or not. So if you leave the tab, I will assume that you will look up the answers. So make sure to deactivate the notifications on your apps for the time of the taking while you're taking the exam, and make sure to leave the websites that will throw pop-up windows. Okay, so a couple of reminders. Quiz 6 is due today before midnight, before 11:59 p.m. And quiz 7 opens tomorrow and is due on next Friday, March 12th. And we have a participation assignment that is due today before midnight. Now, today I'm going to, I have a couple of slides to finish the digestive system and nutrition. And then I'm going to go over some concepts in the immune system and vaccines. And afterwards, we will have some time left for questions regarding the study guide for the exam. Okay, so the digestive system, we left off just before I covered the large intestine. And basically, large intestine completes the absorption. So from the small intestine over here, the food moves, the partially digested food moves to the large intestine through a sphincter. And in the large intestine, there's this small addendum called a blind intestine or an appendix, where sometimes food can get stuck, and if it gets stuck in the appendix, it can cause an inflammation and a disease called appendicitis. Well, it's not a disease, it's a condition called appendicitis. And if your appendix gets inflamed for a long time, then most probably you will get it removed surgically. It's a very simple and a very common surgery. Right, so from the so the food, as the food moves through the large intestine, the water and the minerals are absorbed from the partially digested food, and this partially digested food called chyme, if you're wondering what this word means. So chyme is partially digested food that moves through from small intestine to the large intestine. Okay, lots of bacteria inhabit the large colon, large intestine. And these bacteria, they are responsible for creating lots of gas, and they cause lots of farts. Okay, and some of the foods, particularly foods that are rich in carbohydrates, are like providing more food to these bacteria inhabiting the large intestine and cause more farts. So an example of the food with large complex carbohydrate content is beans. So if a person eats a lot of beans, the partially digested carbs will end up in the large colon. The bacteria will feed on it and create lots and lots of gas. So what else is here? And from the large intestine, eventually the food, the undigested food, once all the water is absorbed, once all the minerals and ions are absorbed from the large intestine, the foods ends up the digested food ends up in the rectum, and eventually it's pooped out through the anus. All right. So in order to stay healthy, we need a varied diet. You've probably heard about this varied diet concept, and you may have even studied what is considered a varied diet, what should you eat and what should you avoid. Well, the short answer to that, the food should be rich in diverse macronutrients and micronutrients. So what is macronutrients? Macronutrients are the nutrients that we need in large amounts, and micronutrients are the nutrients that we need in small amounts. So macro means big, micro means small. So macro means large amounts, micro means small amounts. The example of macronutrients are water, carbs, proteins, and lipids, and micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. We need lots of vitamins in the group B. The example of the B group vitamins in the group B are niacin and folic acid. The niacin and folic acid are mostly contained in meat. Meat is very rich in niacin and in the vitamins in the group B. And often the vegetarians who have been on the vegetarian diet or the vegan diet for a long time, for years, for decades, they are at higher risk of developing the deficiencies in vitamin B. And some symptoms of the vitamin B deficiencies are weakness, fatigue, diarrhea, some problems with the nervous system, and the disease called pellagra, which in extreme cases causes dementia, but in mild cases, diarrhea and dermatitis. Okay. We need lots and lots of vitamin C, which is contained in citrus fruits, tomatoes, peppers, strawberries, and cabbage, particularly sour cabbage. And this vitamin is needed for support of the blood vessels, for production of connective tissue and neurotransmitters. So if we don't have enough vitamin C in the diet, if we're depleted of vitamin C, then we can develop a disease called scurvy, and it's basically some signature symptom is basically bleeding from the gums, weight loss, and some skin problems and weakness. So, and eventually, because of the bleeding of the gums, the teeth will fall out. So the scurvy used to be a very common disease among sailors. So sailors would get on ships, and I'm talking like 16th century, 14th century sailors, okay? Sailors would get on ships and travel long distance, and for a very long time, they would not have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. So this deprivation of fresh fruit and vegetables, it caused a severe vitamin C deficiency and scurvy. And lots of sailors did not have teeth at that long time ago. So to prevent scurvy, they would eventually they figured out that they could pickle stuff and take it with them, and pickled stuff would not spoil for had a long shelf life. So sailors started taking with them sauerkraut, or sour fermented cabbage. Fermented cabbage can stay good there for a very long time because it's literally spoiled cabbage, and it contains large amounts of vitamin C, so which is very good because for long haul journeys you could eat that sour cabbage and prevent your teeth from falling out from scurvy. Now, vitamin A is another important micronutrient, and it's contained in the liver, dairy products, egg yolks, vegetables, and fruit. And it's the deficiency in vitamin A can impact your vision and immune system, because it is responsible for basically supporting the night vision and the new cell growth. And vitamin D is pretty easy to attain if you live in places like Florida, because you can just go sunbathe for a bit, and like 15 minutes of sunlight can supply you with the daily norm of vitamin D. And so in addition to the sunlight, I mean, the sunlight facilitates the synthesis of vitamin D in the skin. So the sunlight itself does not contain vitamin D, but our own bodies can synthesize it when the skin is exposed to sunlight. So vitamin D is also contained in fish liver oil, milk, and egg yolks. It's very important for calcium absorption and therefore bone formation. So if there's not enough vitamin D in the diet, like if long ago when people who lived in northern latitudes, extreme northern latitudes, they did not have enough exposure to sunshine, and often kids who were born there, they would develop the disease called rickets, and rickets manifests itself in skeletal deformation. So bones did not form properly when a person developed rickets from the vitamin D deficiency. We also need lots of minerals, and this table lists some important ones here. So we need calcium for bone formation, and as well as, remember, we need calcium for the muscles to work. Calcium ion changes the shape of the actin so that myosin tentacles can bind to them. So calcium assists in muscle contraction. So calcium is contained in milk products and green leafy vegetables. And if you don't get enough calcium in your diet, you will likely experience muscle cramps and twitches. Your bones will not be that strong. They will be easily breakable, as well as your heart may malfunction because, again, calcium ions are needed for muscle contraction, and heart is a muscle, an important one. Now we need iron, and if you don't get enough iron, you may develop anemia. And in children in particularly, low iron levels have been associated with learning deficits. Now iron is contained in particularly rich food is liver, like beef liver or any kind of animal liver. To a lesser degree, meat, eggs, poultry, and whole grains. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. Shellfish, egg yolk, peas, beans, dried fruit, and whole grains. So we need phosphorus. Phosphorus also participates in bone formation. So if you don't get enough of it, you will have problems with your bones. Potassium is another important nutrient. Remember, we have sodium-potassium pump. So if you don't get enough potassium, you will have some problem with your nervous system, and also with your heart. And we need sodium for lots of things. Sodium is another component of the sodium-potassium pump, right? So if you don't get enough sodium, you may experience muscle cramps, nausea, and weakness. And sodium is pretty easy to find. It's contained in our regular table salt, as well as to a lesser degree in meats, fish, eggs, poultry, and milk. Okay, I'm seeing some chat notifications. This is making me hungry. I just had breakfast, so I'm good. You guys should have breakfast before this. This is going to be tough. Yeah. Or during. You know, I don't see you, so the benefit of the online teaching or an online learning is basically you can snack all throughout the day or all throughout the lectures. Okay, any questions about the micronutrients, macronutrients, the large intestine, before I move on to immune system? Moving on. Immune system. So first, I'd like to point out like what's pictured here. Basically, this picture shows a stage in the vaccine development. So vaccines are developed in eggs, have large part in the vaccine development, and this is the egg here. Not only the eggs, but fertilized chicken eggs. Okay, so viruses are injected into the fertilized chicken eggs, and viruses replicate inside the fertilized chicken egg. And these quick virus replications are needed for the eventually for the vaccine development, especially if the vaccines are live type of vaccines. So the main job of the immune system is to prevent illness, okay, or rather fight off the illness. For instance, when we get, or fight off bacteria and viruses, when we get a paper cut, we immediately feel the effects of the working immune system because the cut ends up swelling up. We have red, the area around the cut becomes red. So you see increased blood flow to the area. It becomes painful. So the little bitty lymph nodes around in the tissues around the cut become inflamed. And I will touch up later on what's in the what's going on in the lymph nodes. But to summarize, basically the white blood cells are starting to flow to the lymph nodes, and they're starting to fight off whatever crud has entered your bloodstream from the paper cut. Now, when we get a cold, we notice that we don't we don't suffer from the cold forever. We maybe experience the symptoms for a week, and that's because our immune system fights off the cold and flu virus, or flu virus. So, and in general, all around us, like everything around us, including and even inside of us, we're full of pathogens. Okay, everything around us is full of pathogens, and but we don't get sick all the time. We don't get like food poisoning all the time, and that's because of our. That's thanks to our immune system, which helps us stay healthy and functional and maintains our basically homeostasis, participates in maintaining the homeostasis. Now, the immune system has several components that work together. The immune system consists of the white blood cells, lymphatic system, and defensive proteins and chemicals. Now, blood cells, there are three types of white blood cells. There are phagocytes, lymphocytes, and basophils. And the lymphatic system has three components: lymph vessels, and lymph nodes. So lymph is the colorless fluid of the lymphatic system. It originates as plasma that seeps out from the blood vessels into the lymphatic system. Okay, so lymph vessels absorb this fluid that leaks from the blood vessels, and along with bacteria, viruses, and cancerous cells that may be present in the plasma. So lymph nodes, they take in these lymph nodes, they take in the lymph, and they clean it up. They clean it up from bacteria, viruses, and cancerous cells. Okay, and lymph travels through the lymph vessels. So lymph vessel is a way of delivery of lymph into the lymph nodes. So yeah, that's all I had to say about that. Any questions about the lymphatic system so far? All right. Now, white blood cells, they defend the body. There are three main types of the white blood cells with diverse functions in the immune system. So the three type of white blood cells are phagocytes, lymphocytes, and basophils. Okay, so phagocytes, I think we've covered. This term should be familiar. Not maybe not phagocyte, but phagocytosis. I mentioned phagocytosis way back when we covered the cell structure and function, I believe. So phagocytes meaning, phago means feeding and cyte means cell. So phagocyte literally means feeding on cells. So it's a cell that is feeding on other cells. Some examples of the phagocytes, which are one of the types of the white blood cells, are macrophages and neutrophils. So they just travel around the lymph and they engulf bacteria and debris. They clean up the plasma or the lymph. Plasma seeps out of the blood vessels, goes to the lymph vessels, and becomes lymph, right? So the phagocytes, they clean up the lymph. Now, lymphocytes is the second type of the white blood vessels. An example of the lymphocytes include B cell, T cell, and natural killer T cells. And they coordinate the immune response, attack infected and cancerous cells. So this meme kind of summarizes the effect of the T cells. We have killer T cells, like here there's just one example, a T cell, but there are two types of T cells. There's a killer T cell and helper T cell. So whenever a virus, let's say a virus, not a bacteria, is infecting the cell, remember, virus hijacks the cell's protein synthesis mechanism, and eventually it will kill the cell and burst out of the cell and infect other cells. So whenever a virus is infecting a cell, the helper T cell recognizes the virus. Well, mainly it specifically it recognizes the proteins inside that the virus has, and it calls for help. Then the killer T cell comes in and does its hero job of killing the infected T cell. And it's kind of, everybody's shocked here, but the killer T, which has done a good job, but helper T cell, yeah. It's kind of personification. I mean, they don't feel, these cells don't feel anything, but I thought it was kind of funny and accurate. And finally, basophils are the cells that trigger inflammation. Okay, so basophils, they facilitate the release of the histamine. Remember that the histamine is one of the neurotransmitters, but it also histamine facilitates allergic reaction type of things. And what is allergic reaction? It's basically inflammation in response to some sort of stimulus. Okay, question. Are lymphocytes given during cancer treatment? I am not sure about. I do not know, Christine. Ansley?
Um,
Ansley, are
so this is actually kind of interesting. So my grandmother has lymphoma. I believe it's
uh-huh.
non-Hodgkin's, which is the less severe form. But one recent treatment that she did at the Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa was that she went in and they took out her lymphocytes that were already in her bloodstream and kind of like re-engineered them, I guess. Um, and then put them back into her bloodstream so that they had like built up immunity, I guess. So I think that they're working on like treatments that are more geared toward that now. But I do remember her telling me it was more of like a clinical trial. So it's starting to be that way, but not quite like mainstream yet.
Huh. So, do you remember like what they did to the lymphocytes?
She didn't exactly tell me like what exactly they did. All she really said was that they would take the lymphocytes like from her bloodstream that I guess were deficient or weren't working properly, and then they just kind of like I don't know if they replaced them with different someone else's or if there was like a transplant. I have no idea. But she said that they either replaced them or re-engineered them somehow. I'd have to do more research on what the actual process is, but that's the general overview.
Huh. Well, thanks for that, Ansley.
Yeah, of course.
Uh, all right. So, a little bit more about lymphatic system. So, lymphatic system produces and stores defense cells. Okay, so the lymphatic system is the part of the immune system that collects the fluid that leaks from the blood vessels and removes bacteria, debris, and cancer cells. Okay, and then eventually it returns the clean liquid, clean lymph, into the blood, which becomes plasma. Um, Now, the lymphatic system again consists of lymph vessels, and lymph nodes, but it also has some lymphoid organs. And lymphoid organs include spleen, which produces and stores white blood cells, thymus, which where T lymphocytes mature, T cells mature, and bone marrow which produces variety of blood cells. So lymphatic system filters out foreign substances. I'm just trying to repeat to the same information so that it stays. And lymph passes through lymph nodes, which remove the foreign substances from the lymph, and each lymph node contains millions of lymphocytes, which basically aid in cleaning up the lymph. So lymph nodes, they release B and T cells into the lymph, which carries them to blood. When we have an infection, lymph nodes in neck, armpit, and groin can become swollen. Usually in those areas they become swollen and tender, and they're swollen and tender because they accumulate extra white blood cells. So when we have an infection, we produce a lot of white blood cells, and all of those white blood cells, they accumulate in the lymph nodes, and we feel the lymph nodes in the armpits, neck, and groin swell up the most because, well, we can palpate that, we can feel them. That's why um, they hurt. But there are lots of other lymph nodes that are swollen, which is they're just located deeper in the body, and we don't simply don't feel them. So lymphatic system can also carry cancerous cells that break off of tumors. So that's why often if a cancerous growth has been discovered in some part of the body, not only usually the lymphatic nodes around the cancerous growth will also be biopsied or examined. And if the cancerous cells are found in the lymph nodes, then it's basically cancer stages are classified by that, whether cancer has started to spread or not. Um, yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that. The immune system has two subdivisions. We have some innate defenses and adaptive immunity. Now, innate defenses, they prevent basically entry of the pathogen. They are always active, and they produce an immediate response, whereas adaptive immune system produces a delayed response. Okay, the adaptive immunity targets specific pathogens, whereas the innate defenses, they target everything. They're non-specific. They just protect from anything. So to give an example of innate defenses, the skin is a type of the innate defense. The mucus in our nose and like in the mouth and basically everywhere we have mucus, it's the type of the innate defense. Earwax, tears, and stomach acid are also an example of the are components of the innate defenses. So tears have this light antibacterial properties. So we can, for example, scratch the eye and may not need antibiotic drops afterwards because our eye will be watery, will be teary, and the tears will kind of not only wash away the debris and bacteria, but they also have very mild antimicrobial properties. So they will kill them. Stomach acid, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, it kills the bacteria that may get into our body, into our stomach with food. Earwax basically stops pathogens from getting inside our ear. And skin is an important one. Skin is a barrier between us and the lots of microbes on the outside. If you have damage to the skin, if you have some holes or I don't know, eczema, which can become inflamed and an entryway for pathogens, then your immune system, your innate defenses will become weakened, and you will notice that lots of inflammation in the area of the broken skin, where the skin is broken. Now, various cell types also participate in internal innate defenses. An example of the cells that participate in that are macrophages. They are non-specific and they consume any pathogen that comes in their way. Natural killer cells destroy body cells that have become cancerous or infected with a virus. So natural killer cells are not the same thing as killer T cells. Killer T cells are kind of specific, but natural killer cells, they don't care. They just travel around the body looking for things to kill. And once they come across a cancerous cell or a cell infected with the virus, they will just destroy it. So basically, our body cleans itself from a cancer. And speaking of, one of the reasons why cancer incidence is higher, increases as the person ages, is because immune system becomes less efficient. The immune system becomes weaker as a person ages. And finally, basophils, they're the cells that provoke inflammation. They release histamine and cause the surrounding tissues from like that. For instance, in skin, if you've broken the skin, the surrounding skin cells will release histamine and cause the reddening of the skin and cause the itching of the skin. And that is basically an immune reaction to the damage of the skin cells. Now, also antimicrobial proteins are a part of the innate defense. So white blood cells produce so-called complement proteins, which puncture the bacterial cell membranes. And cytokines are proteins that can cause a rise in the body's temperature called fever. A high body temperature indirectly counters microbial growth. So you may have heard in the news recently that one of the complications of COVID-19 is so-called cytokine storm. And it's when the cytokines go out of control. You cannot, like, the body does not lower the content of the cytokines, and the cytokines provoke fever and the continued inflammation, and it's just impossible. Even though the virus may not be there anymore, may not be in the body anymore, cytokines still are, and they do mediated damage to all of the other organs by causing body's temperature to be too high and inflammation to go out of control. So cytokines, they affect the hypothalamus. Remember, the temperature is regulated by the hypothalamus. So cytokines are the proteins that affect the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus in return will send the signals to other body parts to increase temperature, to cause a fever. All right, and inflammation is an internal innate defense. Inflammation is an immediate response that recruits white blood cells to the area and helps clear debris and creates environments in a hostile microbe, hostile to microbes. So I already covered kind of this example, so I'm just going to move on. This is basically the break of the skin, and after the skin is broken, some pathogens enter the hypodermis. And once that happens, then histamine is released and tissues swell up. The blood flows to the wound, and the white blood cells start fighting off the infection.
Just
Now,
a
yeah, go
just
ahead.
a more of an observation. Is that why partly why how cuts heat up or as they swell? Is that part of making it an uncomfortable environment for new bacteria to grow and or form by part of all of those things coming together?
Yep, yeah. So the heating up is a result of the blood flowing to the area. But yeah, like the kind of indirect effect of that is the elevation of temperature that usually it's not that is usually higher than bacteria or viruses would prefer it to be. And the fever is like the body's way to kill off the bacteria, because like if we have fever high enough for the bacterial proteins to denaturate maybe, or but not high enough for our proteins to denaturate, then we're all good. So we have a fever of 100 to make our environment, our body's environment, inhospitable for bacteria and viruses. Yeah, so increased temperature is also a response to invaders, to bodies invaders, to kill them off or facilitate them dying off. Any other questions, observations? All right. So now adaptive immunity, now moving away from the innate immunity and into adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity is triggered by so-called antigens. And antigens are molecules at the surface of bacteria and viruses and other invaders of the body. So usually the simplest example of the antigen is a protein embedded within the membrane of a bacteria, okay? So bacteria circulate, bacteria can invade and circulate our blood system, and they will be recognized as invaders because of these proteins or antigens embedded in the membrane of the bacteria. So these antigens, they stimulate an immune reaction by B cells and T cells. In addition, we may have antibodies circulating our system, and they are Y-shaped proteins produced by the immune system that bind to the specific antigen as part of the immune response. So antigen, again, is a molecule that a virus or a bacteria has, any invader, foreign substance in the body has. And antibody is a T-shaped cell produced by the immune system, within the immune system, that binds to the antigen. So once the antibody is bound to the antigen, it signals for the killer cells and other white blood cells that this type of cell needs to be killed. Okay, so if we have lots of antibodies, that means we are more efficient at fighting off a particular type of the pathogen. So a primary immune system response can be slow. For instance, if we catch a cold and like let's say it's a flu season, and we caught a flu virus. So the first response, so the x-axis here will be time in weeks, and the y-axis will be total antibody concentration. So from the time we caught it, nearly like it takes almost 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks for the antibodies to peak, for the antibodies for the flu virus to peak in our bodies. And then after the flu virus has been cleared from the system, the amount of antibodies will subside. The amount of antibodies to the flu virus will subside. So you probably heard that we have lots of antibodies to COVID if we've caught COVID before. We have lots of antibodies to it, but the antibodies do not stay in the blood for a long time. Like there are estimates right now say that the antibodies stay for about 3 months. And then after 3 months have passed, you don't have much antibodies anymore and you can catch COVID again. So back to the flu though, if you have antibodies and the antibodies subsided, if you catch the cold again or catch the flu virus again, your immune system will, after having been sick with the flu virus, your immune system produces another type of cells that will cause immune system to remember this particular type of a virus or this particular type of the antigen. So whenever you catch the same strain of the flu again, the production of the antibodies will be much faster compared to the first time that you caught the virus. Okay, so that is the reason why within the same flu season, if you catch the flu virus twice, the second time you may not even notice that you've caught it because your immune system produced the antibodies so quickly, and the antibodies bound to antigens, and because of the antibodies bound to antigens that signal to the other killer cells in the immune system, that these type of cells need to be killed off. And bottom line is, your body tends to respond faster when you catch the virus or bacterial disease the second time compared to the first time, to such great degree that you may not even feel sick. All right, so the time is 10:07. I'm just gonna mention a couple of things about the vaccines and then I'll take questions. So, vaccines tend to jumpstart the immunity. It stimulates so-called active immunity against a particular pathogen without causing an illness or causing very mild symptoms that are nothing compared to the real thing. So it consists partly of antigens from the viruses. Usually these viruses are inactivated, or other pathogens to stimulate a primary immune response in the body. So basically, vaccines inject your body with an antigen to train your immune system to kill off or to react to a particular antigen quickly later on. So the antigens in the vaccine basically teach the immune system to recognize the invaders. And this green buddy here is the invader. The yellow spikes on this green buddy are the antigens. And basically, this is a virus that, let's say, green things here are can be considered as an antigen. Either of those would be present in the vaccine. So vaccines can be of several types. There can be live vaccines or vaccines containing weakened or attenuated pathogen. So for instance, polio, if you received a vaccine for polio orally, like if it was dropped in your mouth, you received a live polio virus. Okay, and this vaccine is considered to be very highly effective against the polio. Now, there are some influenza vaccines that contain the weakened pathogen, and they're usually administered through nasal spray. Now, measles, mumps, and rubella and chickenpox vaccines contain the weakened pathogen. Now, there are vaccines that contain inactivated pathogen. For instance, there is a polio vaccine that is injectable, and this injectable vaccine basically contains the inactivated pathogen, but it is less effective compared to the live vaccine. And whatever is injected, basically, for the flu is the inactivated pathogen. And hepatitis A is also an inactivated pathogen. And there are some vaccines that contain the toxin. Like some of the pathogens may not be dangerous to the body, but their toxins would be. So, for instance, tetanus. Tetanus is the type of disease where your muscles basically lock up. It's also called the lockjaw, and that's basically literally, that's because literally your jaw locks up on tetanus. The tetanus, you can catch tetanus if you have deep puncture wounds and if you dig in soil a lot. So if you haven't had your tetanus shot in the past 7 years and you kind of work with soil a lot, you should probably get a booster. um, so the tetanus, the pathogen itself, it's not really bad, but what is really bad is the toxin produced by this pathogen. And this toxin is the thing that causes the lockjaw and the muscles to kind of tense up. And with diphtheria, diphtheria is an unpleasant disease that unfortunately is not very prevalent anymore. But it basically, you cannot breathe when you catch diphtheria because the bacteria form a film in your throat that prevents you from inhaling. So the vaccine against diphtheria contains the inactivated toxin. And sometimes vaccines contain some subunits of pathogen, like pertussis or whooping cough vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, human HPV or human papillomavirus vaccine, and there is some experimental vaccines for Lyme disease, which contain the subunits of pathogen containing the antigen. So that's all I wanted to say about vaccines. And there, I see there is a question which Ansley answered. I'm just gonna look through it. How does the body respond to allergic reactions? Okay, since there is a question about allergic reaction, I'm just gonna
I
show
think
the
I was
slide
wrong
here.
when I said basophil. I don't remember. Is it basophils or eosinophils?
Uh,
Possible.
Basically, they are mast cells. They're a little bit different cells
Okay.
that will release the histamine, but the mechanism remains the same. Like allergies happen when something harmless is recognized with our bodies as a pathogen. As a result, whenever a cell comes into the contact with an allergen or with something harmless, the cell starts to freak out and release histamines in the surrounding tissue. And what does histamine do? It causes redness, swelling, and itching because of the changes and because of the swelling mainly. So in the extreme in the extreme cases, the allergies may trigger the anaphylactic shock, which basically your airways will swell up so much. The histamine will trigger the swelling of the airways so much that you will not be able to breathe anymore. And what is the treatment for that? Well, EpiPen or epinephrine pen, which is also called adrenaline. And what adrenaline does, it widens your airways, so it counteracts the swelling. Okay, and that's the allergies. All right, now we have 7 minutes left. And what questions do you have about the material for the exam?
Yeah, I have a question about how our bodies defend against pathogens. So I was thinking of the systems, the organ systems that protect us. Am I on the right track with that, or is there something I'm missing?
How our body, okay, so the body defends against pathogens. We have like innate defenses, like the skin protects us from pathogens. Stomach acid protects us from pathogens. Um, what else? Mucus, earwax, and so on. But since we will not have questions from this lecture, I would focus on like physical barriers that protect us from pathogens, which is basically skin.
Okay, thank you.
Anel, did you have a question? I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I did.
Go ahead.
So when we're talking about the endorphin glands and the hormones that they release, I know that in previous lecture we talked about how the anterior pituitary produces 6 hormones and the posterior produces like 2, and it talks about like the location of those. Would we need to know all of those hormones, or what would you like want us to focus on when we're studying like the endorphin system?
Endocrine system.
Endocrine system.
Endorphin, well, endorphin is good, literally makes you feel good, but the system is called endocrine.
I'll get it next time.
No worries. So I would like you to know all of the hormones and what they do. So it's not a lot. I don't really think it's a lot. And if you have a question about a specific hormone, just shoot, or you know what, shoot me an email, and I can. If you get confused after today and you study over the weekend, just shoot me an email and I'll respond.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lauren asks, what type of autoimmune diseases would you like us to know, or is it just general definition and how it affects what? Autoimmune diseases. Ansley, do you remember? No, hold on. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm gonna remind myself what was meant by that. Or Ansley, feel free to cut in if you remember what was that about.
Okay, I think it may be referring to just the definition and like the general effects and how it like works against the immune system, but
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna check here. Oh. So there is one I don't okay, so autoimmune diseases may not have been best clue for that question. I would focus on I would ignore the autoimmune diseases, and focus on basically the function of different components of the nervous cell. Like if you know the functions of the nervous cell, component like nerve cell parts, then you would be able to. There is going to be a question about the autoimmune disease, but the question is formulated in such a way that that you will be able to answer it if you know the functions of what do different nerve cell components do. Okay, for Nellis, would you go over fast twitch and slow twitch muscle? Yes. So slow twitch muscle, it has more capillaries going to it. It has more blood supply, or oxygen, and therefore oxygen supply. So they look darker, and because they have more oxygen, they're able to produce more energy. They're able to produce more ATP. Remember, muscle cells are full of mitochondria, and they produce lots and lots of ATP for muscle work. So the slow twitch muscles, if they have more oxygen supply, and remember, electron transport chain is the part in the mitochondria that needs oxygen, and electron transport chain produces the most ATP. So if a muscle has more oxygen supply, it is able to use up more energy. The muscle cells are able to produce more energy, meaning the muscle is able to carry out more work. So in the slow twitch muscles, there is more blood supply, and therefore slow twitch muscles are able to carry out more work for longer amount of time. Now, fast twitch muscles, they are physically bulkier, but they don't have as much blood supply. So fast twitch muscles are able to carry out heavy tasks for a very short period of time, whereas slow twitch muscles are able to carry out substantial amount of work for a longer amount of time. And Anel, can you go over the function mechanism of SSRI? Yeah, so SSRI, first of all, it stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So since literally in the name of the SSRI, it is implied what they do. So since they block the reuptake of the serotonin, and serotonin is the happiness hormone, okay, you feel basically your serotonin increases. The amount of serotonin, the concentration of serotonin increases, and you feel the positive effects of that. Any other questions? Last minute ones? It's 10:21. All right. Well, have a great weekend, guys, and good luck on the exam on Monday.
Oh, wait, there's one question about the junction between neurons. Are you able to answer that like super quickly?
Yeah. Which one was that?
Can you explain the junction between, it just says explain the junction between neurons. Austin.
Okay, the junction between the neurons. Okay, so the junction between the neurons is called synapse, and the synapse consists of the axon of the neuron that will send the electrochemical impulse, the dendrites, and the dendrites of the neuron that will receive the electrochemical impulse, and the synaptic cleft. Okay, so it's important to remember how the neurons communicate with each other, and the neurons physically do not touch. So that means that physically the neurons cannot, push each other or send the electric signal to each other. How the neurons do communicate the messages is through release of the neurotransmitters. Okay. By the way, serotonin is an example of the neurotransmitter. So the gist is the electrical impulse causes the vesicles, the bubbles containing the neurotransmitter in the axon of the sending neuron to be released into the synaptic cleft. And this neurotransmitter released in the synaptic cleft is sensed by the receiving neuron. And this signal, basically chemical signal, produces the electrical signal in the receiving neuron, and which propagates to the next neuron. So this is kind of a brief overview of what happens in the synapse. And Alexander asks, what do you mean by the reuptake of serotonin? So serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It is released. It has to go away somehow, like eventually. And this serotonin may be like reuptaken, removed by the neurons from the synaptic cleft, okay? And if it's not in the synaptic cleft anymore, then the receiving neuron will not do anything. But as long as the serotonin remains in the synaptic cleft, like the signal, some sort of stimulation will be provided to the receiving neuron. So since serotonin has like a good effect, quote unquote, good effects on the body, then if the serotonin hangs around in the synaptic cleft for longer, it produces like some positive effect. Okay. Any other last minute questions? Ansley, did I cover everything?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Well, have a good weekend, guys.